And welcome to High Performance.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Nice
to see you again after we talk about our history. I first met you in 2000, right?
Yeah, I
we
think
worked
it would
together.
have been 20 odd years ago. And I was a sort of starting out sports presenter. And I think it was probably was it your first job on the telly?
Yeah.
Oh.
So we both learned. You can assess how well we did now on this podcast.
Yeah, please don't, because one of us has gone on to global stardom. The other one's still living in Norwich. We always start this podcast with the question, what is high performance?
I think for me, I've had 3 careers, really. I started out actually music, as we'll probably talk about, then went into academia, which I still do, and then the television, radio, live shows. But I think across all of them, I think it's doing a good job, finding the way to do a good job. And for me, I find it's attention to detail. I found that in all those professions, nothing is easy. It requires practice, and it requires attention to detail, and it requires you to also, I think, for me, take responsibility for getting it right. And so those are without rambling on for 50 minutes, that would be my definition.
Well, let's dive into a few of those then. We'll start with the first one you mentioned, which is kind of the getting good at something. There's that great phrase, isn't there? How good you're willing to be at something depends how long you're happy to be bad for.
Yeah.
That makes sense to you?
Absolutely. And I think it's about practice, isn't it? I often say, because I think it was one of the first times I'd been on any chat show. I think with Jonathan Ross, I just started to get well known. And I said, with my exam results, I did well in physics, but I got a D in maths. And everyone was surprised, you got a D in maths. And it's because I didn't practice hard enough. And I said at the time, and I strongly believe it's true, that very few people are naturally great at something. I'm certainly not. And I suspect most people you've had on this podcast, there's the odd Mozart or Messi or something like that. But most people, I think, have maybe a bit of an aptitude for something, but it's mainly about practice. And I found that with maths, definitely. I found it with music, and I found it with making TV programs as well.
So do you remember when you first understood that?
Probably when I got a D in maths, actually. Honestly, right. Yeah. It was...
Was it unexpected?
Well, I had actually, I joined a band beforehand, so I didn't think I was actually going to need it. It was at A-level, and I didn't think I was going to go that route. I thought I was going to be a musician, so I'd sort of slightly lost interest. But I think it probably was. I noticed that although I'd been okay at school, I could do things, and I could do physics. I think that was the first time where I realised that you actually have to put work in most, if not all, the things that you do in order to get to a really high standard or high enough standard.
No, I've heard you interviewed before, Brian, where you've said that kind of message, I imagine, was being drummed into you by your parents, and now you're the father of a 14-year-old son. How do you get kids to understand that you've got to put the effort in to get good at it without having to go through that bitter experience of getting a D?
I'm not sure if you can. My experience is that if you're lucky, your kids will find something they like doing. And actually, with my son, he's playing guitar. So he the moment he started playing guitar, he's been practicing over and over again. He picks it up and he practices, and he's getting good at it. And so that wasn't me. I think most parents will say you can't force your children to be interested in something. It just doesn't work, right? Very rarely. But you can hopefully give them the encouragement when they find the thing that they're interested in. And I hope then that he's learning a more general lesson, which is actually the more you practice and the more work you put in, the more enjoyable it is, the more you enjoy it, the better you get at it, the more you enjoy it, and there's a virtuous circle. And that I really think that applies to virtually everything that we do in life. But I think you have to find it yourself.
And I'm so pleased you've mentioned luck, because people very rarely talk about it, particularly successful people. They very rarely say, well, I kind of got lucky. And we're very aware on this podcast of survivorship bias. Successful people telling everyone else how they've done it, thinking that it's easy because it was easy for them.
Yeah.
But there is, I'd love to find out a bit more about your relationship with luck, but also the fact that you clearly understood from a young age, luck was there, but without the hard work, then that luck was eventually going to run out.
Yeah, that's if I've got one tip, and as you said, it's so boring to listen to people who've been lucky describe how that it wasn't luck. it was all my doing. And you're absolutely right. For me, it's about opportunities. If you're fortunate, and I suppose you could argue you can try and put yourself in the right position and things like that. But broadly speaking, if you're lucky, then you'll get a few opportunities. And then it's having that, I think, that knowing that you're not just going to sail through then. You've actually got to do the work to try and seize that opportunity. Sometimes it'll go wrong and sometimes it won't. But that's what I would say. That's what I've learned. Partly because I've had at least 3 different careers. So I've been through it really 3 times thinking, how do I've been lucky, and I want to do this. So what do I have to do now?
Could you explain your process then to people of how you go from that moment when you make a decision that you're going to change career maybe to working out how you're going to not just be okay at it, but be great at it or be successful at it? What do you go through?
Yeah, I mean, with the caveat that you can never, I don't think you can plan to be great and successful, can you? But you try and...
You can plan to do your best, right?
You try and have a go, give it a go. And a good example, I think, for me was with physics. So I'd been in music. So I was 23 years old, I think, when I went back to university. And of course, I was behind those people. Most of the people in my year were 18 and they just come through A-levels. And they'd done probably better than me in the exams initially because they'd all got better grades. But also they were fresh and they'd just come out of school. And I'd had 5 years being in a rock band. Yeah. So I realised that I had to work really hard, particularly in maths, which I didn't have and don't have a natural aptitude for, if indeed anyone does, right? So I think the key thing for me is I realised, and I still think it's very important, that I had to take responsibility for my own success or failure, right? So, and it really matters in academia at every level. Ultimately, and I say this, I teach, right, at the University of Manchester, and I say it to the first years, you actually know, you don't need to do an exam to know whether you understand something, actually. You know in your deep down, you know whether you understand something or not. And if you don't, then go and understand it. And you know, we, the lecturers, everyone, the teachers, whoever it is, we're here to help. Yep. You come, but it probably, in my case, usually, if I don't get something, it comes from reading about 3 different textbooks and sitting there and thinking. And sometimes it can take a couple of days, and sometimes it can take weeks, and sometimes it can take months. Sometimes I never understand it, right? But it's going through that. For me, it's really important to take responsibility for your own, in this case, understanding something, being able to understand some bit of physics. But it could be, you know, running fast. It could be playing football well. It could be playing the keyboards well. Ultimately, I don't think anyone can teach you to be great. To not just be great, but to be whatever level you want to be. I think you can be helped by being taught. But I really think you have to take responsibility for it, because just to say, people got different rates. I mean, I've worked with some brilliant physicists. I've been really lucky to, and quite often you'll meet someone who's brilliant who just doesn't get something, this concept, and you go, why not? And it can take them weeks to get it that I could get in 10 seconds. But then the flip side is also true. I'll be going, I just don't get that. And they'll be going, what do you mean you don't? It's obvious.
But will you explain to us then about the courage to ask what might be the obvious question, or to expose an ignorance? Because I think that can often get in the way of people's learning, because they don't want to look silly, or they think they should know something that they don't. Yeah,
maybe that's what I mean by take responsibility, because that sounds a bit harsh, doesn't it? But you're right. It's understanding that it's true for everyone, that no matter how brilliant you think they are, there will have been times when they just couldn't do something. They just didn't get it. They couldn't play that chord sequence smoothly on the piano or whatever it is. And so it's about, you're right, it's about not being ashamed, because everyone's like that. Just say, I don't get it. I just don't get it. And there's two steps there, actually, isn't there? There's being honest with yourself that you don't get it.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to kid yourself, going, "Yeah, no, it's all right. I'll be able to do that." You know, and you can. So you've got to say in physics, for example, you've got to say, "Do I really understand that concept?" And very often you find that you don't. You find it when you teach, actually, when you become a lecturer or a professor and you give a lecture course. It's always the case, even if it's to the first year, the first term, that what you might be the simplest bit of physics that you do in a degree, you will always find when you try to give that lecture course, there's something in there that you go, actually, no, I don't get that. I didn't understand it, did I? I went through all these years and I just didn't get it. So you've got to be really honest. And then you've got to persevere, I find, anyway. You've got to then keep going, because you will. Ultimately, if you keep going at something, you'll get it. But it might take you 6 months.
Yeah.
But so you've got to have that perseverance then.
And what about your learning style? Because you've spoken around, you'd never had formal music lessons, but you taught yourself to play. You've then said when you go to university, you're having to ask questions of mentors and lecturers. Yeah. What have you learned about the best way that you learn that you could pass on to our listeners?
For me, it is keeping going at whatever it is until I can either understand it or do it. You know,
right.
And you know, sometimes you won't be able to. I mean, if I try to, just recently actually, I discovered a brilliant recording by Keith Jarrett, who's one of the great piano players of all time, of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And he's done it several times, actually. He does it live quite a lot. And the best one, I think, is on an album called La Scala. And I had a huge argument with a friend of mine about which was the best performance he ever did of that. And I thought, I want to know what he did, because it sounds pretty simple and melodic, actually. And no way. Right, there's no way I'm going to play it like Keith Jarrett plays it.
And you've tried?
I've tried, and I'll keep going.
So you've done the effort thing that you'd normally do.
And I keep going, but it's just, actually, he's one of the great jazz piano players of all time. So, you know, you will reach your limit at some point. And I could go for probably 30 years trying to play that like Keith Jarrett. But I still wanted to, roughly speaking, work out what he was up to.
Right.
So, and I'm still spending quite a long time trying to work out what he was up to.
There's another interesting element to this, though, isn't there? Which is passion. And I remember when we worked together, you know, all those 20 odd years ago, watching you talk about the things you're now famous for talking about, thinking, this guy just has such a passion for it, which I think is why people can relate to you and the way you speak. So, and we can talk about that later as well. But I think the reason why passion is so necessary is I think it keeps you coming back for more. But it also means that if you don't get to the point where you can play a piece of music like someone else or kick a football like a famous footballer, it kind of doesn't matter because you still love it. I'd love to get your thoughts on the importance of passion when it comes to high performance.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you'll ever get good at something that you're not passionate about. You know, I'm sure that's probably true, actually.
Yeah.
So, and I think, as we said earlier about kids, the thing that you're passionate about is completely unpredictable, isn't it? I think you get, for some reason, I got excited about stars.
Do you know why?
I've no idea, really. It's just always, as far back as I can remember, I've liked space, whatever it is, Apollo program, stars, anything. Right, about space I've liked. And that's just one of those things that must have captured my imagination when I was little. I don't remember why. And so I suppose, but you're right then, when you go into the television business that we're in, then having is it confidence? What is it? To just displaying your passion, just saying, well, I'm not trying to be professional. I'm not going to try and break these things down and try and deliver it in any way that you would be taught to deliver things as a television presenter. In that, I'm just going to say it how I see it. Yeah. This is what I find exciting about that, and so I'll just talk about that. So that's what I've always done that, because I don't really see any other way to do it. Partly, actually, probably because I've never seen myself. I've never been interested in being a television presenter or seen myself as having that as a job. I've always seen myself as a physicist who was fortunate enough to get offered a few of these television programs to present.
What's the passion there then? Is it sharing with other people what you know? Is it seeing other people get interested and excited? I think I know you well enough to know it isn't for the social media follows and the autographs, right? And the upgrades in restaurants and hotels. That's not what it's about, is it?
Yeah.
Although they're nice.
You've not denied that.
Hold on, I've rumbled you.
There's a lad from Oldham.
I mean, the serious answer is, so I grew up, one of the things I grew up watching was one of the people was Carl Sagan, who I don't know if anyone is old enough will remember, I think, Carl Sagan's Cosmos. And it was on the BBC, 13 episodes, 13 weeks. And there was very little science on television at that point, only 3 channels or something, I think, at the time. But Cosmos was on. And Sagan presented astronomy, and he talked about astronomy in the solar system and the universe. But he put it in the context of our civilization. And he was explicit that this way of thinking, this way of interrogating nature, trying to understand the natural world, is vital for our survival as a species. It's central to it's one of the necessary foundations of civilization. So it was a polemic, and so I genuinely think that science has the thought process, the things we discover, and that way of thinking about the world, acquiring reliable knowledge about the world, it's the way we do it. That's important. So I do have an agenda when I talk about science on television or live shows or whatever it is, because I think that it's important. There's an underlying feeling there that I have that these. I said once, actually, someone asked me once, why do you want to present a program on BBC One, for example, about astronomy? And I said, I think science is too important not to be part of popular culture.
Yeah.
So I really believe that. So if you believe it and you get a chance, you get the chance, the platform to do it, then it would be ridiculous not to try and take that. Right? I do think that scientists, if they want to and get the chance, have, in some sense, a responsibility to talk about it. Because, and there are obvious things we could talk about. One topically, actually, is Oppenheimer. So I don't know if anyone's seen the film. I think it's a masterpiece, Oppenheimer. And I was interested in Oppenheimer. I got interested in him as a character quite a long time ago because I discovered that he gave the BBC Reith Lectures in 1953. And they've almost been obliterated from history because they're really hard. And so we don't tend to think of it. But in those lectures, when I found them, I saw this scientist who obviously, famously played a role in developing the atomic bomb, so in delivering the means by which we might destroy ourselves as a civilization. And he obviously knew that, and it tortured him. So that what that made him do was think about how we might avoid doing that.
Yep.
Right? So he started thinking about politics and society and civilization. And are there any lessons from this tremendously successful approach to acquiring reliable knowledge, which we call science? Are there any lessons that we could apply in wider society? Certainly wasn't saying that scientists should run the world, right? He clearly decided that was a bad idea. But some of those lessons, you might call them transferable skills, which perhaps goes back to the heart of what we're talking about, are important, I think. And one of them is not kidding yourself, not deluding yourself into thinking that you understand something. So really understanding that the world is very complicated.
Yep.
And there are many ways of it's difficult to understand a black hole, right? A collapsing star. But it's also difficult to understand how to run a society. It's really tricky. So there aren't simple answers. There are. And we could talk. I'll stop talking about that, but I could talk about it forever. But it's that I think is always when I got the opportunity to talk about science in my mind. That I enjoy talking about it. I think it's wonderful. I get excited about talking about these big ideas, but also in my mind there was also the things that Oppenheimer and Sagan, Richard Feynman, and other of my heroes had also said,
Yep.
which is that there is a responsibility to talk about this way of thinking and the things we've discovered.
Which leads us into one of the areas that I think you're masterful at, if you don't mind me saying, is overcoming a common trait that you see with lots of intelligent people, the curse of knowledge, that you know an awful lot, but your ability to translate that knowledge and make it accessible to 7-year-old children or to a mass audience on the BBC is a unique skill set in itself. And I'm interested in exploring, how do you go about being able to communicate these complex, difficult ideas in a way that people can understand and start to get to grips with?
You know, in part, it's about that. We talked earlier about honesty, being honest with yourself, about how difficult it is to understand some of these concepts. So if you've been through the process, and I find this, I'm quite slow quite often. I don't understand. Oh yeah, that's it. Then what I do usually is just talk about the way that I understand something. And it's quite often the way that a 7-year-old would understand something, because you've been, I find anyway, if you're honest with yourself, then if you really do understand, if you really deeply get something, you've been through that process. So you've seen how difficult it is. And it's almost always difficult, right? So you're not going to wave your hands around and obfuscate and say, when you see someone doing that, and you see it at university, you know, I saw it with people who taught me, you can tell when they don't really understand something because they fall back on jargon and so wave their hands around and go, and usually that's because they've not been through that process, and they're sort of not tricking you, you know, but it's probably that they're tricking themselves into thinking.
Are you
that
comfortable saying, I don't know?
This is the basis of science. It's fundamental. I mean, Richard Feynman, we mentioned, it's a Feynman Nobel Prize winning physicist, also worked on the Manhattan Project, actually. One of the greats, a great teacher as well. And he called science a satisfactory philosophy of ignorance, right? And it's a really deep point, actually, because he meant that all knowledge starts from you, the individual, accepting that they don't know. You start with, I don't know how that works. I don't know why the sky's blue. I don't know why the leaves are green. I don't know why the universe is the way that it is. And you have to start from that point. And then you try to build a reliable picture. It's a model of the world in your mind. But being a scientist, of course, it's about doing research. And that means that you're going to the edge of knowledge always and being extremely comfortable standing on the edge of the known, the dividing line between the known and the unknown, and trying to find out a bit more. So you have to be delighted to not know. And excited about it, to go back to what you said, passionate about not knowing in order to make any progress. And I think that's a skill. It's about jettisoning any fear of the unknown, isn't it? And I think a lot of time we get into a lot of arguments, you know, as a society about things that are pretty unknowable. Well, unknowable at the moment. We don't know. So even basic things like, did the universe have a beginning? Right. And we know that the universe was very hot and dense 13.8 billion years ago. That's good. We call that the Big Bang. But whether that was a beginning in time, whether the universe existed in some form before that, what it means to talk about the beginning of time, we don't even know what time is. Right? We don't know. We've got some sense, by the way, that it might be built of smaller things, but we can leave that alone. So, but the thing is that it's key, isn't it? Because a lot of people talk with great confidence about, well, how, you know, I know how the universe began. I know why the universe began. The answer is, how can you? Nobody knows. We don't know yet. And that's interesting and exciting.
Yeah. If you can sit here and say, I don't know, then that's great for everyone.
Yeah, and if you think about it, so we do accept in certain professions that it's good to know what you're doing. Like, for example, flying a plane.
Yeah.
So being an airline captain.
Yeah. Doing an operation.
A surgeon, the designer of a nuclear reactor. You know, there are things where knowledge, you know, and experience are valued. But you're right. I suppose it's, if you look at how our knowledge, and I used the term before, reliable knowledge, how that knowledge was acquired, it was acquired by people starting from the basis they didn't understand And then the moment, this is critical in science, the moment that some new data appears, some new evidence, some new observation comes in that conflicts with your picture of the world, then you start to be interested. You start to be excited. You go, well, if I'm wrong with my picture, then I'm delighted because I've learned something. I can rule that picture out, and then I can go on to a new picture. So you have to be delighted when you're shown to be wrong because you've learned something. And that, of course, that does apply. I mean, that's how we have reliable airline flights. So that's what pilots do. The airline industry knows this. When someone makes a mistake,
comes from failure.
A mistake is analysed and in detail. You're not supposed to, point the finger and think in those industries. You're supposed to find out how not to do it again. It's like building a bridge, right? There are certain things, usually engineering or surgery, medical procedures, as you say, where it's all about the success is about acquiring knowledge, about doing it better next time. It's not about everybody thinking that you were right. And that we should just apply that. It's pretty obvious, really, when you think about it, isn't it?
Well, it is in terms of the outcome, but you've mentioned a few things there that have sort of resonated with me, Brian, that I think would be helpful just to unpick for anyone listening to this, because we all want the best outcome we can, whether that's improved knowledge or of any topic. But I'm interested in the ingredients that go into creating an environment or a culture where that can be embraced, where people don't see it as fearful to be challenged. And I'm interested as what would you say are the most key ingredients to do that?
I think it's pretty simple. It's almost rewarding people for being wrong. But you know the sense in which I mean that. It's saying that it is part of the process of making this better. It is for you to recognise when you're wrong, find it a positive experience and learn. Science in schools, doing experimental science in schools is really important. But it's not that you need to know about swinging a pendulum or, what the speed of light is or anything like that. That you don't need to know that stuff. But you need to know how to acquire reliable knowledge from nature, because that's the same process as acquiring reliable knowledge from observing how a policy works or trying to run a country. It's the same process, but it's easy to learn when you boil it down and say, right, I'm going to just swing this pendulum around and see how long it takes to swing, and then put some more weight on it and swing it again. That's how you learn those important skills.
So we need to be better at asking questions rather than answering questions.
Yeah, I think, we have to be less confident in our answers and better at asking.
Let's take your world, for example, right? How much do you think we don't know about what's around us?
I mean, we know almost, we know a lot, but then almost nothing as well simultaneously. So, as I said, it's interesting. There's a few stories the other week, for example, about the new space telescope, the James Webb Space Telescope. So this is the successor of the Hubble Space Telescope. It was designed to see farther out into the universe than ever before. And looking far out into the universe means you're looking back in time. Because, for example, the most distant thing you can see is the Andromeda Galaxy. With the naked eye, you can just about see it on a dark night if you know where to look. You can see it with binoculars. And it's a wonderful thing to do. So I'd recommend anyone who's listening or watching, go just find it. You'll see it in the sky tonight. If it's clear, it'll be there. And
what are we looking for?
You'll see. It's kind of if you know where to look, it's a misty patch in the sky. It's actually quite big. It's almost it's a reasonable fraction of the size of a full moon in the sky, but it's very faint. But there's a constellation called Cassiopeia, which is kind of a W shape, and it's close to that.
What should people search for on the internet to try and find what
the
they're looking for?
best way is with the app, the phone apps.
Yep.
So you can get those phone apps, which are free, most of them, Star Walk kind of things, and you'll find it. And then if you've got a pair of binoculars, you'll search around and you'll see this misty patch, and it's wonderful because that's the most distant thing you can see without a telescope, and it's 2 million light years away, which means the light took 2 million years to reach your eye from that galaxy. So that means it began its journey before we had evolved on Earth, right? The human Homo sapiens are not that old, right? 2 million years. And so you're looking back in time, 2 million years. You're seeing this thing as it was before there had been the humans existed on the Earth, right? 2 million years. And you can see it in real time. So what the Webb Space Telescope can do is look so far out to such distant galaxies that you're seeing the first galaxies form in the universe. And that's what it was designed to do. And the reason we want to do that is because we don't really understand how they form, right? We're interested.
How far away is that light?
Well, that's over 13 billion years of light travel time.
Wow.
So we're talking, and the universe is 13.8 billion years since the Big Bang, right? So we're talking about seeing the first galaxies form in the universe and taking pictures of it. And not surprisingly, it's not quite as we expected. So, and I saw some headlines that said, crisis in physics. And it's not a crisis. That's how you do science, right? The reason we built this big thing and sent it out to make those observations is because we weren't sure that we had it right. We probably won't have it right because we hadn't seen it before. And there is indeed something interesting, and it could be profound, or it could be a little twiddle to our model, and we're not quite sure yet. But that's how you do it. So we were never going to be right.
The biggest crisis is having all the answers. Where do we go then?
Yeah, and we don't even, Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, I don't think we'll ever have the answers by any means. I mean, there are deep questions. Are we alone in the universe? I mean, probably not. You'd guess there are 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe, right? So you would expect not.
What have you made of all the recent headlines about, someone in the States saying he's seen evidence of alien life forms on Earth, something that was collected from the bottom of the sea, those tiny ball bearings, and they say this has been formed by a life form outside our galaxy.
It's a theory, that, isn't it? I mean, so there's a theory there. And so you can get the little things and we will analyse them and have a look. I mean, I wouldn't, it's funny because you mentioned social media, I think, occasionally on social media, I'll quite often I'll tweet something and there'll be quite a few people who disagree reasonably strongly with what I said. And one of them is the UFO thing, there are people who really believe that there are UFOs visiting the Earth. And I always say that, I haven't seen any evidence of that I think is strong evidence. It's a huge claim that there are other civilizations out there that are visiting us. But I wouldn't be surprised in a strict sense, that if I said to someone the other day, if a big UFO came now, we walk outside and over Westminster, there's a spaceship hovering, I wouldn't be in the least bit surprised, because I know that there are trillions of planets in the Milky Way galaxy alone and hundreds of billions of stars, and there's been a lot of time. And one of the great mysteries actually in physics is why we don't seem to see much out there, anything. We haven't, there's strong evidence of nothing out there at all at the moment. We have no strong evidence of any life beyond Earth. And that's a puzzle and a paradox. So it's about, with those claims, you don't rule them out. If someone says, well, I found this thing at the bottom of the sea and I think it's really weird, then the correct thing to do is go, okay, we'll put it in a lab and get an electron microscope and prod it around and find out just how weird it is. And Feynman again said, the thing to remember is nature does not care at all what you think. Nature doesn't matter who you are or how famous you are, how many letters you've got before or after your name, whatever. It doesn't matter. Nature just is. So if indeed an alien spacecraft crashed into wherever it was that they found these things 1 billion years ago and left all the fragments there and we've dug them up, then that's interesting, isn't it? but that's it.
Oh, very.
That's, but if it didn't, then that's also interesting, because then we get a profound puzzle about why there don't seem to be many civilizations around.
But what I love about your answer to that, Brian, is that you tread that line between being agnostic and saying I don't know versus being cynical by saying I know and that's not right. And I'm interested in walking that line.
It's a good question. I mean, because with that, it's quite a profound claim that there's a piece of if that's what it was. This Avi Loeb, isn't it? He's a professor at Harvard, I think. Yeah. So it's quite a profound claim that this is a piece of a spacecraft or something from outside the solar system. And the correct thing is to say, well, that's an interesting theory. Let's have a look. It might be. So I would have no no basis for saying, well, that's nonsense.
Right.
It's a completely contentless statement, isn't it? I don't know. How will I know? I haven't. It might be. And that's
So then
it.
when
Really.
you talk about social media then, so you do go on there and you do elicit some strong reactions from people.
Well, I'm from Oldham. I can't help it. That's the thing. It's I don't know whether it's a character flaw or a positive part of my character, but I think there is an element of that, isn't it?
What is it that keeps you humble to be able to accept these diverse views?
But for me, I think this might sound great. It's nature, right? In the sense that we talked about the transferable skill of science, and because I spent most of my time actually learning how to be a research scientist, you're just wrong all the time. It's practice, actually. Feynman, again, I keep going back to Feynman. He was wonderful. He's a great philosopher, although he hated philosophy. Well, he acted as though he hated philosophy, right? But he said that. He said scientists have a very great experience with being wrong. And that's probably the transferable skill. Because it goes back to this thing, you can't argue with let's say you're trying to understand how a star works.
Yep.
And you go, I think it works like this. And then you look at the star and the star doesn't work like that. You can't start shouting at a star, can you? Because it's bigger than you and you're not going to win the argument. You never win an argument with nature.
So what would you say has been the most powerful revelation about yourself that you've discovered was wrong?
Oh, in terms of science, it's almost all the time when you're doing research. You have a feeling that you understand some new data and you have a sense that there might be something there. I mean, I did particle physics for a long time, which is working at places like CERN and Fermilab in Chicago, and those places you get loads of data. And you sit there on your computer looking at this new collisions of particles. And one of the things, the golden scenario, the Nobel Prize would be if you saw a new particle. You've discovered a new one. I mean, no one ever did. Well, the Higgs particle is a good example of when we did, very rarely. But late at night, because you've got loads of data, it's like tossing a coin and it comes up heads 20 times. And you go, no, there's something there. There's something there. And you can convince yourself there's something. You keep going, and I've not got a Nobel Prize, right? So every time I thought that, it went away. Right, every time. But otherwise, I would be a Nobel Prize winning physicist.
You keep going back though,
because that you're trying to understand nature, and you're trying, and very occasionally there'll be something that will stand up, and something new will appear. But that process of it goes back right to what we talked about at the start. That process of trying to understand something that's difficult to understand, and forming views and models and opinions, and then finding out that most of the time you're not right. Oppenheimer and find that they were right when they said that skill you should transfer. That's hard as well. So saying don't only do it with little particle physics and little graphs on your computer screen, do it with your political views. Then it gets harder. But if you understand what those great thinkers were actually telling you to do, it is that. It's saying you understand now, you've done some practice, you're not right when you're trying to understand nature. Now imagine you're not right with your view about the top level of tax or whatever it is. Imagine you're not right about that as well.
So what's been the biggest thing that you've changed your mind on then, that for you personally, that like away from physics or your professional life?
It's a good question, that. I mean, I think in politics, so I've been through a long learning process for something I didn't agree with. So let's say Brexit. So let's be careful talking about Brexit, but it's something I didn't agree with. And so I've learned to try to understand why a majority of voters voted for it. It's not because they're wrong, right? Even though I don't agree with it. It's like, what is it that is wanted? Why would someone come to the opinion that doing something that I think is the wrong thing to do is the right thing to do? And perhaps it is the right thing to do. So what is the data that might come in that would say to me, well, actually, no, I was wrong there. I'd be, again, and I'd be doubly delighted to be wrong on that, by the way, because I want the country to do well. Because I'm in it, and this is where I grew up. So that's an example actually of where I am actually. Although some people listen to this, if they watch me on Twitter occasionally, will go, or whatever it's called now, we'll go. Yeah, this is just not. It's not. I'm looking for evidence that I'm not right, and there's a route to a better future through, outside of the European Union. That would be an example.
And we've talked in great detail about, holding beliefs lightly, looking to push the boundaries, being humbled by what is around us, being okay with failure because failure is growth. And I hear you talk often on these kinds of subjects because this is your area of expertise and you're amazing at it. But I don't hear you very often talk about how that informs your life as a father or your life as a husband to Gia, who's someone else who I remember fondly from working together with over 20 years ago. Obviously, you asked her out on a date quicker than I did.
I don't know. we should compare diaries afterwards and find out.
No, sure, I wasn't already with Harriet at that time. So we shouldn't compare diaries. Let's not compare diaries. I'm really interested in how this idea of being a lifelong learner, which you clearly are, informs those soft sides of your life, if we can call them that, as a partner, as a parent, as a friend.
Well, yeah, again, I mean, we touched on it, didn't we? About I think that certainly that element of seeing your children grow up, and no matter how much you might want them to be a physicist or a historian or a footballer, whatever it is, then really just being delighted when they find the thing that they're interested in, whatever it is. I think that really is really important. But we've talked about that, haven't we?
What is the advice then that you give to your son from all the things that we've spoken about already, but the things that you've learned about? I mean, I'm humbled by the size and the scale of what's around us, and I think that stops me from obsessing about the little things. Right? It's actually really helpful. That's why I love history so much, because there's thousands of years worth of stuff. What happens to me doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear what you say to your boy about keeping him going in the right direction, or the things that you share.
Well, I say that, and we talked about it on the radio show I just did last night. So I think this idea that it is so unlikely. First of all, it's unlikely that you exist, which is a big point, and it's kind of obvious. But secondly, it's quite unlikely that you exist in a time and in a place where you can actually, in his case, spend the time learning how to play guitar, if that's what you want to do. It's an astonishing, it's an astonishing piece of luck and so it would be ridiculous if you just didn't find anything, didn't do anything, just coasted through life, not noticing that you're fortunate. In a very profound sense, by the way, you're even fortunate to exist. But and also, I think in scientific terms, actually, it seems to me that we live in this baffling, astonishing, beautiful universe, and it seems to me that not making any attempt to understand it in some way, and it might be understanding it in different. It doesn't have to be doing mathematics and doing physics, but just notice something is worth pursuing and being interested in. I think that's the foundation, actually, and just notice that there's something worth being excited about, whatever it is.
I think that's why you do so much of what you do. Many people would be successful and write a book and stop, or do a bunch of TV shows and think, I've done enough of that. Yet you don't stop, and doing live experiences for people, I know is something that you're really passionate about. I wonder whether if we talk about, we mentioned passion, I wonder whether for you it really is just igniting fires inside people to go and explore.
Yeah, and also me, actually. So I like learning curves, which we haven't really talked about, actually. So I like I'm doing, talking about live shows. So I've done these big live shows kind of on my own with my friend Robin Inson, who's a comedian. But now I'm doing some live shows with a symphony orchestra. We did it at Sydney Opera House in December. And it came up, the opportunity. And there's a great conductor, actually, Ben Northey, who's a conductor in Australia and New Zealand. And he had said to me, there's this music, it's Strauss. So everyone knows the start of 2001, that thing, the start. Well, that's part of a 20-odd minute piece of music, and no one ever listens to the rest of it. But the music is based on a book by Nietzsche, and Nietzsche's book is about, the way Ben said it to me, is how can humanity justify our existence when faced with the power and an infinite scale of nature? How can we justify it? And so this piece of music is an exploration of that thought. It was written just at the turn of the 20th century, 100 years ago or more. But it's an exploration of that idea, but musically, based on this philosophy work by Nietzsche, famous book. And so I thought, the challenge of taking that music and weaving in a narrative of cosmology and astronomy and what we know about the size and scale of the universe, which Nietzsche and Strauss didn't know. They wrote this. It's astonishing. We're talking about let's say 1900, that sort of area just before, that we didn't even know there were any galaxies beyond our own. We didn't know that till the 1920s. It's unbelievable. So the context has changed completely in what we know about the size and scale of the universe. So there's something more to be said. There's a dialogue between those ideas and that music and the things we know today and the latest images of the universe. Something will come out of it. There's something interesting that will happen. It's really exciting.
Well, let's dive into
that's what I'm excited about.
This learning curve thing then. So someone says to you, look at this amazing piece of music, have a listen to it. How involved do you get helping to turn that into an event for thousands of people at the Sydney Opera House? What's the process for you?
Well, so then I sit there with it, with that music and his ideas. So in this case, collaboration. So Ben has sent me actually a recording of it with him just talking over it as a conductor, saying, well, this is, and it's incredible actually, the depth. He's going, this is a quote from the Catholic Mass, which is saying this, and this is a quote from this, and this is so the complexity of the music is incredible, actually, intellectually brilliant. I sit there and I sit and I listen to it again and again and again. And it's another thing, actually, we could talk about, have patience. So don't think, oh no, I've sat here now, I've listened to it twice and I don't know what to do. So I'm just confused. So let's not do that. I just keep going. And at some point, then something occurs to me and I say, actually, that this image that the James Webb Space Telescope took of a stellar nursery, for example, the stars being born, and if you put it against that bit of music, then it kind of says something else. It says something about things being born and the life cycle of stars, and that's a bit like the life cycle of a human. And you can start to make connections, and that's what I want out of that collaboration. I want there to be something that emerges that wasn't really obvious in the music and wasn't obvious in the science, but somewhere in a conversation between those different art forms, something may occur which will be interesting. And then you have to have patience to say, oh, I'm not going to rush this. I'm just going to find it. And the one thing I get impatient about actually is when I have to do other stuff. If I get really into something, I don't want to do anything else. So I just suddenly, it's boring. The other thing's boring now because I just want to sit there with Strauss and Nietzsche and the Hubble Space Telescope and come up with something. That's what I'm now interested in that. So I'm not really, I can't be bothered doing the other stuff. So that's that's how I do it. It's about having for me, the lesson is it's about being confident that if you keep at it, so it goes back to what we said earlier, really, you keep at it, and that can be when you need some creative spark.
Yeah.
If you keep going, it'll come, right? So at some point, you'll have the idea.
Yeah. But let's explore that topic of patience, because we do live in a world of super fast speeds, quick opinions, instant access to whatever we want. So the idea of sometimes accepting that it's going to be slower than we want it to be, or we have to be comfortable with the discomfort of not knowing.
Yeah.
What have you learned about patience that you could share with us?
Well, that you can't, there's no magic formula to having an idea or indeed being good at something, as we spoke about earlier. There isn't a magic formula. It is time. And I think quite often you have to, you have to let your head become filled with ideas and then just trust that at some point something will come out of it. So I think, and I'm well aware, by the way, we talked about luck earlier. Also, having the time to be patient is a luxury. You're fortunate if you have. That's one of the things I feel most fortunate about, actually, is that I've managed to stumble into jobs, and they've all been a bit like this, actually. If you're in a band, if you're musical, or you're an academic, although there's all sorts of pressure on academics now, as there is in everything, right? Same with bands, actually. You have to put the album out and do the tour and all those things. But I think ultimately, if you can get yourself into a position where you've got that luxury, it's very lucky. Then you can use it. So I think. But I'm being careful to recognise.
Give yourself time, though, because you could work all day, every day, and do corporate speeches and tours and books and TV shows. I mean, you could work 365 days a year.
Yeah. So I think if you can, and again, some people can't, but if you can, then that's really important to not be. It goes against the saying, isn't it? The make hay while the sun shines. It's the opposite of that. It's if the sun's shining, then go and have a think about what you're going to plant. I don't know how we can push this. That's
you're doing well.
I'm saying.
Can I ask you about doubt? Because we did a UK tour, and it was racked with doubt for the two of us. Would people come? Would people like it? Would we mess up our words? Would there be value in it? Would people laugh at us? Would they ask questions we can actually answer during the Q&A part of the show?
Yeah.
Like, what's your relationship with doubt? Because a good example is the Sydney Opera House and some amazing music. I'd immediately be thinking, am I worthy? Am I going to deliver? How do you deal with that?
Well, the first thing to say is that it goes back to what we said earlier about being not tricking yourself. So only I will know whether when I walk out onto the stage, I'm satisfied with what I've come up with, what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Only I will know if those images and the things that I've done, they're going to be on the big screens, the right images, and it's up to me. So I take responsibility. So by the time I walk out on the stage, I will have made sure that I am happy with what I'm going to do, and that's important, I think. But also, again, Feynman, I remember this great quote at the end of it. He wrote a brilliant essay called The Value of Science, which I recommend to everyone. It's about 3 pages. It's online. And at the end, there's a quote where he says, what we have to learn is how doubt is not to be feared, but welcomed and discussed. Right? So doubt is not to be feared, but welcomed and discussed, which I think is profoundly important, actually.
How do you do that?
So but by, I think, as I said, accepting that clearly everybody is taking risks all the time. But as long as, if you're happy that you've done everything you can and you're happy with where you've got to, then walking out onto a stage shouldn't be an issue. If you think there's nothing more I can do here, right? I've done it. I think this is what I want to say. I know what I want to say. And then you're right. If people don't get it, then what you should do is learn. Okay. And I don't know about your live shows, but I'm always learning. You always do something in it one night and it just doesn't work.
And what's your attention to detail like on these shows? How involved are you in the various elements?
Oh, completely. I mean, because of this process, I would not be confident walking, and I can't actually. Same with TV shows. Actually, I'm really bad at doing a piece to camera, where in the cliched world on top of a mountain, right, with a helicopter shot, and I'm really bad at it if I'm trying to say something that someone else wrote for me.
Right.
I really can't do it. It doesn't work. I can't remember it. I'm not an actor.
Why is that?
I'm really bad. I don't know. I just don't have that skill, so I can't remember lines at all.
But also it plays into authenticity as well.
Well, it's partly just because I'm rubbish at remembering lines. But what I can do is if I know what I want to say and I say it, then I can say it with sufficient eloquence for it to be okay and work. Broadcastable, as we always say. We always say, is that broadcastable? Yeah, it's all right. Right, let's go to the pub. Broadcastable. But so that's what the way that I work. I have to know what I'm going to say with a point I want to make.
Yeah.
And then I can say it in my own way. What I can't do is learn lines. I just can't do it.
So, as a scientist that's always open to the possibility of new information, new evidence, challenging your view. How do you get comfortable with just being good enough? Like where you leave something and just walk away. You're not constantly trying to refine it. So, like the show that you're doing in Sydney.
It's a great question, that, because the other thing which we haven't talked about in let's say creative industries, writing a book or piece of music, being in a band, writing a song, is actually finishing it. Yeah. And it's the same in science. It's that I often say to students who want to do a PhD, I think doing a PhD is wonderful. You grow intellectually and as a person hugely, because you have to produce a new piece of research, but you've got to write a thesis, and so you've got to stop and you've got to write this thing which is new knowledge, a contribution to knowledge, and you've got to know when to do it and you've got to finish it, and that's the hardest bit of all. And actually in the bands I've been in, the great songwriters, Peter Cunningham from D-Ream, for example, the band I was in, would say this, the craft, some of it's inspiration, right? And so you have a little, you write a great thing, things can get better, right? You get this great thing in your head. But turning that into a 4-minute pop song is the professional bit, it's the craft. So you're right that you've got to stop and produce something at some point. And that's a judgment call, I think. We'll all know in our lives, that there are things where you just keep going, that little project, and you never quite do it, you never finish it. So I agree, that's a skill. It's discipline that you've got to do.
What's your cut-off then? Like, what do you have?
It's usually that we've sold the tickets for this gig.
Right, okay, so it's happening tomorrow.
Yeah.
You announce a date for a show. You've got to deliver on that. Is there any other methods that you use?
Yeah, I don't like the pressure. I like a deadline, but I don't like the pressure of the deadline. So I tend to try and overwork on it early. And I always did this actually in doing exams at university as well. I wasn't one of those persons who I didn't like to cram it all in. I like to be relaxed.
Yeah.
So I like the deadline in 3 months' time, and then I will do most of the work in the first month. Actually, that's the way that I work. Because then it gets better. Then you get the great ideas when the pressure's off. When you've got the framework and you go, okay, right, I've got it. That'll work. Then it gets a lot better.
We're about to do our quickfire questions. Before we do, one of the common traits we found on this podcast is optimism. High performers tend to be optimists. No matter what's happened today, yesterday, they think tomorrow is going to be great. You know so much about the universe, and as you've admitted, you know so little about the universe, as everybody does. Where are you regarding our future? Are you optimistic?
Yes. We seem to have avoided we've avoided destroying ourselves so far. So I think, I'm worried about it, because I'm worried that it seems to me that political debate has become extremely polarized in a way that really matters, particularly in the United States, actually, where it's very important that country stays stable. And so I'm worried about that. And you see it here to an extent. And so, although actually we seem to be handling it quite well in this country. I mean, we don't usually give credit to our political system, but it seems to be dealing with quite an upheaval, particularly starting with the Brexit referendum and those things. It seems to be dealing with it. So I'm worried. And one of the reasons I'm worried, actually, I was asked to give a talk at the COP Climate Summit in Glasgow, just by video, 1 minute. And it was a little project. And they said, if you could say anything to the world leaders there, what would you say? And I said, just very simply, that given what I know, and given a lot of people I've spoken to, it's possible that we're the only civilization in the Milky Way galaxy at the moment. Right? It's worth considering that might be the case. And there are reasons we can go into about why that may be the case, but it's possible. So if it's true, imagine it's true, I think that if we're talking about the meaning of it all, as we talked about earlier, what does it mean to be a human in this universe? Well, meaning is a property of intelligence, I think. So clearly the universe means something to us. So meaning exists here. But if there's no other intelligence out there in our galaxy and we destroy ourselves, then we might eliminate meaning in a galaxy of 400 billion stars forever. That's what we might do. So consider that, world leaders. You have potentially a galactic size responsibility
Wow.
to maintain meaning in a galaxy. And so that's why it bothers me, because I think that's true.